Welcome back to another episode of the HIT podcast. My name is James Layton, CEO and founder of Anderson James. This is the podcast where we bring you real life stories from some of the most interesting leaders of our sector. Today, I was delighted to be joined by Richard Ellis, Director of Sustainability at Peabody. We talk at length around the decarbonisation and net zero carbon agenda, and we also talk about the merger between Peabody and Catalyst. I hope you enjoy the episode, and if you do like it, I'd ask that you like and subscribe. Richard, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, how are you doing?
Very well, very well. I was just saying to you offline, it's very cold up here at the moment. We just had the snow hit us quite hard, so yeah, just getting through that. Just the way I like to start these normally is just, could you just do us a bit of an introduction and a bit of background to yourself in terms of your role, a little bit about Peabody, please, for the listeners?
Sure. Peabody is a London Housing Association. It's been around for, if I get my maths right, at least 160 years. You may know us from these big courtyard estates, big Victorian things that you see dotted around London. But we've grown to 67,000 homes, and we're just about to merge with Catalyst, if all fingers crossed, everything goes well. I'm a chartered surveyor by trade. I went all the way through investment, worked privately, worked publicly, and then ended up about 2 years ago as Assistant Director of Asset Management, and thought I better do something about the sustainability thing. I'm writing a 30-year strategy. I need to get cracking on it. So for my sins, I wrote the strategy, and then they made me Director of Sustainability. So I look across the entire business and see how we can become net zero carbon by 2050.
Amazing. Thank you for that. So many questions. 30-year business plans. I mean, I do a 3-year business plan, but it must be difficult how you look into the future that far. But just in terms of sort of the shape and size of Peabody, then how many homes, what will you be if the Catalyst merger did happen? Sort of what's the landscape and the helicopter view of that?
So at the moment, we're 67,000 homes. Roughly split, half is our estates, half are street properties. We've got about 30% of our properties would be Victorian, so they need a lot of work done to them. When Catalyst join, we'll be just over 100,000 homes. Now, I believe their stock's a little bit newer, but I haven't seen the data, so I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, that's what they say at this stage. and sort of like your early years, like how did you get into housing? Just give us an overview of that. I mean, like what you said, chartered surveyor, but what was your route into the market, in the housing industry?
Well, actually, weirdly, my father was Director of Technical Services at a tiny housing association in Crystal Palace. Right. I did think I was going to be an economist for a while and didn't quite get the grades at university. Maybe I partied a little bit too hard. Yeah. And then came out, and my dad gave me a job on the way back out. So I then started surveying. So, yeah.
And just in terms of, you say the housing stock, is Peabody's housing stock all in London, or is there pockets outside of London where the stock is?
99% inside London.
Is it?
We've got some 6,000 or 7,000 properties out in a place called Thamesmead, but even then, that's still almost certainly London. A few scattered around in Essex, but yeah, almost everything's in London.
Wow. And how, just looking at the COVID situation, how has that affected the strategy? Did you write it pre-COVID, the 30-year business plan, or after?
Well, yeah, I wrote it just before, but obviously it's made it much harder now. So, I mean, one of the things obviously we talked about before we came on was how it's changed how we work. So one of our core goals was to be net zero carbon by 2030 for our business. We wanted to look at all of our corporate assets, see how they're performing, and then see what ones we needed to make more energy efficient. And actually, as it's turned out, we're working from home, and we've got rid of 2 of our major offices. So we've only got 1 left. We're retrofitting that at the moment, so that it's more of a meeting place, more of a training place. Yeah. We don't at the moment, fingers crossed, see that it's something we'll go back to working 5 days a week in an office. It's going to be much more flexible, a lot more local delivery of services. Yeah. And we have a number of satellite offices around the place to deliver those from. So it'll be a combination of flexible working, some local delivery, but maybe some of the core core
Yeah.
practical needs.
How have you found that? I mean, not to go off on tangents here, but how have you found that from an engagement with the customer, the end user, the tenants, the residents? How have you found COVID from being connected to what's going on, and all the services that you offer have been obviously massively disrupted during COVID. However, how have you found sort of the now flexible working and the agile working around managing your team and your customers and all the different parts of the business?
That's a big question. If I go for residents first,
yeah.
I think in terms of delivery with our residents, we obviously, everyone moved to emergencies only at the start. We've started to, we have been rolling that back now. It's just meant that our data's had to be much better. Right. Our communication strategies can be much better. We've had to over communicate on what we're trying to do and really explain to people what we're about and how we're going to get there. We've also had to then protect our staff that's on the ground, obviously, because we don't want anyone catching COVID walking around. So we've had to do quite a lot of work around them, a lot of education. But I think between our residents and the staff that are on the ground, they've been working together. I would say that would be the key thing. I would say they've been working together and actually understanding the pressures that we're under and they're under, and trying to be a little bit more human about it. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's definitely rationalized the services as well, and it's rationalized the customer service and putting the customer at the heart of everything we do. And so if we look at the 67,000 properties, then when you wrote the strategy, what were the key things that you looked at? What were the key kind of highlights that come out of that strategy for you? I noticed that you were net zero day-to-day business by 2030, what I read, and new and existing homes by 2050. So that was some of the key summaries.
Yes. So we ran the data. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing I can ever take away from any of this is run the data and see actually what's there, and then use that to make your decisions or help you inform your decisions. But I think the biggest thing that I learned throughout the whole thing, and I can go on to the other stuff in a minute, is actually, and it's become clearer and clearer over the last year, is the need to take our residents with us and our staff with us. So we are going to be looking at an education program for our staff to get them grounded in what's going on and how they're going on, because in the end, it's not, I will be talking to a lot of residents, but it won't be me just talking to them all. And they've got to understand and they've got to know. And if there's no point in me going to the residents and creating a lot of demand, for then it come back to the staff and the staff don't know about it. So it's got to be quite joined up. But what we've done an awful lot of work sort of technically putting things in place. We've done some tenders for energy. We know our data. We've done a lot of planning. We've been working with the treasury teams for ESG and various other bits and pieces. But the next big push, I suppose, for us, other than merging, is actually to get our staff and then our customers and explain to them what we're doing. Because I'm sure that many people who listen to this podcast have done things, and sometimes they've worked and sometimes they haven't. And generally it's the resident engagement that's the problem, or the bit that we need to resolve. Not a problem, it's what we need to resolve. So if we can get the education, we can get their buy-in, then actually that's the bit that's going to make this work. And actually they should be demanding more from us.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the social housing paper was really, really keenly focused. I felt like a big focus was around the resident and the tenants, and that was great to see. But I think that the housing industry, certainly in the 15 years I've been in the housing industry, it's got much better, much better. And a lot of the decisions now are educating, as you say, the residents, but also the internal staff that are delivering the services, because clearly comms is a big part of it. And how far do we go with education? Because the other thing that I realise is that people have a different view on what net carbon zero looks like, and certainly the decarbonisation agenda. I think people have got a very different view, organisation to organisation, person to person. But what are the key things that we need to teach our employees and teach our residents about when it comes to net zero carbon and decarbonisation?
Well, I think the first thing you've got to realise is that this isn't a game. This is not something that we could finesse or be clever about or do a little bit of accountancy tricks here and there. As I was in a seminar a couple of weeks ago, Jonathan Porritt, if you remember him from Friends of the Earth, was speaking on that, and he said, if we deliver late, we failed. So you've really got to think about that and line up the organization and line up your customers to accept that. And there are going to be quite big changes that are going to be needed. Some of the things we can do are really easy at the moment, but we've got to put in the foundations for the big changes that are going to have to happen in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. There isn't going to be a magic bullet or nothing that we've seen. It's going to be lots of little things and people working hard together to get to have that happen. And I think that's the point, is that we have to work together as a firm and as a housing organization, customers, but across the sector as well. We need to really work together to get this right.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I love that as well. Yeah, like we can't fail. Well, we can, but there's a finite end date to this, isn't there, in terms of failure and success for certain.
Yeah, there's no planet B.
Yeah, exactly. There's no second planet. And just like looking at Peabody from an organizational point of view, does the challenge intensify or get more difficult with you being very inner city London or not? Is it the same challenge as other housing associations, or does the city environment make it harder?
I think it makes it harder in some ways, easier in others. So it costs more, I think. And getting those resources in, doing that, working with people. If you took a street that we have, some of our street properties, you're going to have a couple of private owners next to us, and there may be another housing association. So there's a lot there that you need to work with, because if you've got a terraced house, maybe you're cladding yours, but you're still leaking energy else out there, or how planning going to deal with that. But then on the other side of that, we have opportunities like a heat network. We can put in a heat network because we've got a lot of properties near us. Yeah. So those sort of things work really well. So in terms of big infrastructure, it probably helps us. In terms of delivery at the smaller scale, then it probably hinders us as compared to somebody out in the outskirts on the countryside.
There's a big conversation going on around EV vehicles. I'd be interested to know what the numbers are for Peabody residents in terms of, I mean, I lived in London for 10 years. I never had a vehicle. I didn't need one. I suppose, is that challenge present for you in terms of EV charging and vehicle network, etc.? Yeah.
Well, what we have found over the last sort of 5-6 years, we've been doing some environmental schemes. Actually, the number of cars that people have in the centre has reduced.
Wow. Right. Okay. It has.
You just don't need it. What we are seeing now, so in the last couple of years, has started coming from taxi drivers initially, but then on from that, we're seeing the demand come through, and we're seeing it on new developments as well. We're going to trial some to retrofit some. So we're going to use the technology which attaches to the lamppost, and then you can trickle charge off that. So it's just us dipping our toe in the water. We want to see where it's going to get us and how we're going to provide it. Certainly on the new development side, we're seeing a greater demand for it.
Yeah, I'd see that. And we've got a big role to play. I was reading something the other day around how big of a role social housing is going to play in the net zero carbon agenda. We're big in the priority list of the country, aren't we, in terms of most of the housing stock is local authority. It's got a huge role to play here, isn't it, in getting this right, I think. Because the one thing I've spotted in new build housing is in some ways, the retrofit problem is more difficult for me than building a new home from a carbon neutral perspective.
Interesting you should say that. I'd say it's probably the other way around.
Oh, really? Okay.
So if you think about building a new home,
I know what you're going to say now.
You can make that operationally net zero carbon. But all of those products that you're using to build that home, you've got to still include that, because it's still carbon. Whichever way you use it, it's still carbon. So you have your operational, you have your embodied carbon, which is you building it, and then you've actually got some what happens at the end of the life of the building when it gets demolished. All of that is carbon, and you can spend it in different ways, but you still only got a certain amount of carbon. In terms of on the retrofit side, most of the technology we have now we can use So that I don't think we have to wait for nuclear fusion. We can put in insulation. We can reduce the demand. We then up the demand of renewables. So we can decarbonise, and we can do it if we want to. It's just going to be challenging in terms of our residents. We've got to do things a different way. Our residents have got to do things in a different way. The supply chain's not there to deliver this stuff at scale. You can't find a retrofit coordinator for hen's teeth. It's like trying to find a fire risk assessor.
Or a building safety manager of last year, maybe.
yeah, absolutely. It's really tough, but it will get there. I suppose what we need, though, and it goes back, and I'm showing my age now in terms of decent homes. When it came out, everyone sort of freaked out about it and said, how are we ever going to deliver that? Within 5 years, the supply chains were running, we had everyone there, and it was quite a smooth thing. If you ask a contractor now to do kitchens and bathrooms all day long, they know exactly how to do it. And it's the same with the retrofit side. It's just slightly more, it is more complicated. But what we need then is government to help us, or give us a standard and give us the financing for it to be long term. It's not, there's no point in us having a 1-year settlement to deliver something. We can't deliver it in a year. If you turn around and say, though, you've got 10 years to deliver that, here's the financing, it's not going to change, then contractors will invest in skills. So will we invest in skills. And then you can bring that supply chain forward.
It's such a good point. I remember the Green Deal when that came out. And I do worry sometimes that people, I think we've taken it more seriously, if I'm being honest. I think climate change and everything has really, really focused people's minds. However, I do think people are used to, and without getting into politics, used to new schemes, new initiatives coming out and then dying of death. And they've invested all the money in skills and training, etc., and then they don't happen. And that happened with the Green Deal for me. What's different this time? Anything? Or is it, I feel like it's got more initiative behind it this time than it has previously?
Well, certainly the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, there's going to be a 3-year settlement. So that's going to be better. And we are starting to see people gear up to that. We're also seeing a lot of boards now. I'm seeing a lot of boards sort of sitting there in council saying again, we have to move. We can no longer wait for government to do something. So there is that. But what I'm not seeing, and the bit that concerns me the most, is the mass of our residents. Actually, they've got so many other things on their plate, so many other worries, that actually, if I go to them and say, hi, I'm going to go and do this, and I'm going to change your house, so it's going to do, but a lot of them just say no, because it's not at the forefront of what they want to do. And we've got to make the case better. And so it's the government. Everyone's got to make that case so that people understand it.
It's a great point, actually. I've not thought about this, but obviously decent homes was an easy sell to people in their homes. You're going to get a new kitchen, you're going to get a new bathroom, your house is going to be a better, easy sell. You're going to emit less carbon. For some residents might not have the same sort of incentive. And I don't know, how do we sell that? How do we make that more appealing to the wider population and wider communities?
That's a $1 million question. I don't know.
Come on, give me an exclusive, Richard.
But, I mean, what can you do? You need to get the people who are the early adopters. You need to deliver that well. And then all of those people who are the next ones who are kind of curious about it, they see what the other people have got and they want a bit of it. The difficulty is, especially if you've got big estates, how do you find the early adopters? You kind of have to do a whole estate solution, which is really challenging. So you've got to educate, you've got to make them part of the process, co-create with them. And then you've got to make it as easy as possible, I think. I've been in a few pilots where, you almost need a master's degree to work out the heating controls. That's not going to work. You need to make it as comfortable and as safe as possible for people.
No, exactly. And I presume the benefit is, and the same with the Green Deal, wasn't it, is, we're going to put some solar panel, we're going to do all these different things, and actually the net benefit to you is that your bills will in turn reduce. I presume that's the same message, right? In terms of, we're going to hopefully make homes more efficient, therefore bills and utilities should decrease over time.
I'm not sure they will. if you have a look now, you're seeing carbon pricing come into energy.
Yeah, okay.
And that's pushing it up. What we're trying to do is to say, or what we want to do is to say, we're going to make them as cheap as possible for you, the energy prices. We're also going to make your home more comfortable, because actually you can't just put in insulation and put in a heat pump. You actually have to increase the ventilation because the homes are tighter. So that will get rid of the damp and mold issues that you're finding. So there's an awful lot of things you're trying to put in, which will make the whole experience of being in the property much better. Yeah, if you do it right.
And for you, what are those main things that we can do in a home? Obviously, heat pumps is a big one that people are talking about. But what are the 3 or 4 streams that you're going to really double down on as Peabody to try and really tackle decarbonisation as quickly as possible?
Insulation.
Okay. Fine.
Improving your insulation. That's a no regrets policy. It's not going to change. And it does so many other things. It reduces the bills. It reduces the strain on the grid. And also buys us time for the newer technologies to get better, for the supply chains to get better. So instead of it being £10,000 for a heat pump, maybe in 5 or 6 years' time, they're smaller, cheaper, and better.
Yeah, fine.
Then obviously you have got your hot water. So be that a heat pump, be that a sun amp, there are various other technologies that you can use to do that for your heating and your hot water. Ventilation is absolutely key, because as you're making it, as the building tighter, you're going to have condensation, damp and mold problems. You need to extract that as much as possible. The other thing I would say is actually, I know I'd add 2 more in. So you got one would be around behavior change. So people have to understand how to use those systems, how to get the most out of them, the best out of them. We've done a few studies before, and what we found is that there are some people out there who turn up their central heating to 29 degrees, put it on for an hour, and then they expect that's how the central heating works. It doesn't work that way. But if you imagine then saying, well, I've got a heat pump and a mechanical heat recovery, you've really got to educate people about how that's going to work. It's going to be on for longer. It's not going to use much more energy, but it's going to be there, and that's your radiators aren't going to get hot. So that's a thing. The other bit, which I think is starting to come in now, and you're hearing it, is around biodiversity and nature-based solutions. So we want to stop. I'm sure that everyone has, or who's listening to this, has an estate where it's just oceans of tarmac, because that's what they use to park their cars on. You need to start breaking up that tarmac, introducing planting. Now that will enable you to stop the flash flooding that happens, because the water will soak into the soil. But it also cleans the air for you, obviously, as it would do. And as things get hotter, especially in London, we'll see, we've got these sort of periods of 4 or 5 weeks where it's over 35 degrees, 35
degrees. Exactly. A few of those.
You need to create cooler areas, and it's going to get more important as you go into the future. And we'll start seeing the projections you see if you get to 2 degrees rise is you're looking at 8 weeks to 10 weeks of over 35 degrees. Right. Now, your insulated home will be good at insulating from some of the heat, but not an awful, but it will get into that, and you'll be struggling. So you need to have, instead of, have you heard of a thing called the heat island effect?
No.
So in a city, everyone's pushing out energy through their buildings, and it means that in the centre of Manchester or Birmingham, it's actually warmer than on the outskirts. What we need to do now is actually make it cooler. So it's called, I saw it yesterday, a cool island effect, where actually those green areas or pocket forests are places where people can go to cool down, and it just cools it down. So there's a lot of things at play, a lot of reducing of energy and making sure that we're insulated as much, so we're not wasting as much, but we also need to create areas where it's going to be cooler in the future, and that will get progressively more important in the next 10, 20 years.
I've got so many questions on the back of that, but I mean, it's amazing how much knowledge there is out there now. Like, all of that stuff has just gone straight over my head, and I feel like I know a little bit around sustainability. I've been in this market a long time, but some of that's such new research and technology and things that have never been around 5, 6, 7 years ago. You mentioned about skills, and I'm obviously interested in this because a lot of people that listen to the podcast I had a chief executive on last week, and there was 2 things that came up as a common theme. One was we don't have enough skills to deliver what we need to do. So let's just start there. What roles do we need to create? What skills do we need to be thinking about for the future? So if I'm a college, what courses do I need to be thinking about to put on for students? Because the one thing that this decarbonisation agenda, I think the next generation of talent find it really sexy, and that's where they want to be. Like it's been quite clear to me that money's not the big objective now. Sometimes for the younger generation, it's actually, I want to work in a place where it's going to make our society greener, cleaner, all of those things. What skills could colleges start to implement so that we could have better skills in the industry?
Certainly, I mean, you've got your more technical skills. So I start there. I mean, I was a surveyor myself. So surveyors, architects, engineers need to start bringing that understanding in. Mm-hmm. And the new technologies that you're bringing. So those people who are designing, who are managing, need to understand what we're trying to do, what we need to do, actually. Then you've got the sort of the guys on the tools. So the people who are gas engineers now. Though I was in a meeting the other day where they were saying the average age of the guys gas fitters was 56. Wow. You know, they're not going to be swapping over to air source heat pumps, but we do need the future to step into air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, solar, insulation. So we need a lot of people who are going to work in that. Probably the less sexy end. But then you've also got a lot of people in tech as well. So energy management. How where are we spending that energy? Where are we producing carbon? All the modelling that goes around that. A lot of BIM modeling, a lot of GIS solutions to really bring that together to make the assets. And actually now, instead, as previously, we would have made the assets financially work as hard as they can. Yep. We now need to think of carbon in the same way, or as energy in the same way, and making that as efficient as you can do it. And then again, sort of going back to a lot of resident engagement. We need a lot of skills in resident engagement and collaboration and how we're going to pull all these people together, because it's a I can specify something to do to your house, but if I don't bring you on board, you're not going to use it properly. And at which point all that investment is not going to work. And that's the crux of it that we need to put together. So there'll be a whole panel of experts to deliver to your house. But we've then got to get you on board and got to get you working on it and then improving that for the next one and the next one.
Yeah, it's interesting because you said about retrofit assessors, which is why I went there. But and obviously that's a skill set. But where do you see some synergies? Gas engineers to be able to do some of the more trade roles and some of the more delivery roles. Clearly, I'm seeing a lot of asset management functions transferring into sustainability. Makes sense. It's about assets. It's about data. Where else could you see synergies in areas we could pull people from wider industries maybe, or even our own industry that could be re-skilled, retrained? Because we're not going to find all of those people in colleges and university, are we? So there's a big effort needed.
No, I think there's a lot to be learned and a lot to be taken from facilities management in corporate. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to be done there. Electricians, I think, people can talk about hydrogen. I don't think that's particularly a solution for us, but it's going to be electricity. We're going to be electrifying our homes and moving that forward and making sure that that's there. Yeah. And then we just desperately need general builders who can actually do what they say they're going to do, and then for us to use technology then to check it, so infrared or something else like that we can do to check it. So I'm trying to think of anything else. Teaching, you know what?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. There's industries where, retail as an example, how do we reuse some of the really good customer service experiences that we've had and engage the customer in a better journey? It's like, I'm just trying to think, because one thing I know from the skill shortage that we're experiencing from a recruitment perspective, the talent's not there. So, we can talk about it until we're blue in the face, but the reality is that we're going to have to at some point think of how do we reskill, retrain, whatever, because there's not going to be enough skills to deliver what we're trying to deliver with all the best strategies in the world, to be honest.
No, and we're talking in a very building focused way.
Yeah.
But actually, if you take that embodied energy that we spoke about right at the start, how much waste do we produce? How much times do we what do we throw away 30% of all of our food? If you're actually starting to look at things like that, education is definitely the way forward. Down in we've got in Charlton Triangle down in Greenwich, there's a small shop that just has fruit that the supermarkets don't use,
right?
And they sell that. It gives one of our residents some practice in running a shop, and it gives them experience, but also it gives healthy, cheap food that otherwise would have gone to waste. So there's a lot of work around that, and we could those things can scale up, and just huge amounts of education for the young people to get on board with this, to start pushing it, not have as many Amazon deliveries or anything else coming up to Christmas. But it's that kind of
Sweet.
Everything. If you could imagine that every pound you spend has carbon with it, and we've got
crazy,
to do
isn't
something about that.
And I'm not a big fan of, and I'm sure you're not, but this offsetting. Let's be really bad with our carbon footprint, and then let's plant a tree. Yeah, it does offset it, and that's all good, but we've got to start thinking about the behavioural change of how do we use less carbon on a daily basis. That's got to be the message.
We absolutely do, but we will need to offset.
Oh yeah, of course we will.
It's not something that, but we can be clever with it and actually offsetting things that work. Not in someone who's going to knock down a tree and then plant another one because that's what the offsetting says. There are funds out there for offsetting that we've been paying. When you develop a home, you pay into a carbon offset fund.
Yeah.
What we should be doing then is going to the borough and saying, you've got that fund there, we've just paid it to you, but actually can we take some of that money and use that to retrofit some of our poorer properties?
Yeah, that makes sense. And one thing that I love about the industry at the moment, and really love about the industry, is we are all learning together. And I see that you're a big collaborator in terms of what you've done. I noticed the other day that you've started the GSAB, which is, well, do you want to talk to us about that actually, like in terms of how you're collaborating and learning together with other housing associations?
Oh, you'll have to, I have to remember what it stands for now. But,
Green Spaces Advisory Board, that's it. Yeah.
So what we were doing was we came together, I think Ria Bales did it, came together just around Manchester and thought no one is picking up the biodiversity angle.
Yeah, okay.
And that's something that we really need to sort out. We know, even through COVID, how important it was to be able to get outside, get out into a park.
Agree.
Get somewhere. Health, well-being, but also, as I said before, around climate adaptation, reducing flooding. We're going to have to change the planting that we use. There's a lot of benefits out there, and have that cool island effect. So we're trying to put something together, a toolkit that anyone can use to share the knowledge, and just try and make it better for people. That's what we're keen to do. But I'm also Peabody, also a member of the Future Homes Consortium as well, working with people like Places for People, Southern, various other
Optimal.
I'll get it right. Not Orbit. Sorry,
Orbit. Yeah.
And again, we're just trying to work together to trying to come up with some solutions. If we went to the heat pump manufacturers, and said we've got 800,000 heat pumps to deliver in the next 10 years, they would step up. But what we tend to do is we all have our own little tweaks on specifications, which then make it just that little bit more difficult. So we're trying to work together, learn from each other, and everyone's done something slightly different, to see whether or not we can get out with something that's really going to make the impact that we need.
Yeah, and it's nice to see people learning together, because honestly, it's a shared problem, right? It's not a you versus us problem. This is our problem, whether we like it or not. It's an us problem. And I think I've seen some real collaboration. I met Alex Wiley from Clarion, and everyone's in the same boat, trying to work out the best way to tackle this problem. And talking about the problem, I suppose What's the number one or two things that you think could derail this decarbonisation agenda in terms of what are the big risks? Funding potentially one. I don't know. What's your thought?
So I would put actually above that would be inconsistency in policy. If you're inconsistent in your policy and your messaging, then it's going to be really difficult. Because if you're not going to get people on side, you're not going to get the supply chain on side, you're not going to get anyone on side if you're inconsistent. So you've got to set a standard and just say, that's where we're going. That's where we're going for the next 10 years. And then actually line everything up to do that. And just keep on hammering it. So there's no second guessing on it. There's no sort of playing a game with it. Actually, this is where we're going and this is what's going to be. And if you don't get there, something will happen. And I think that's the biggest thing that we need to do, because then everyone knows the road that they're on. At the moment, there are too many ways of getting to somewhere, and there is a lot of invention that needs to happen, but the basics are there. They're known. We know we can insulate. We're decarbonising the grid already. So those things are already happening. It's about getting the rest of the journey. And then, and then it's then the funding that enables us not only to put this in, but also to spend the time in talking. So I go back to talking about residents again, but talking to them and making sure that they're on the journey with us.
Yeah, I love your view on that, by the way. I love your view that the resident's really important in the educational piece, because often, being honest, like when I speak to people, that's forgotten. And I don't mean the residents forgotten, they're not. But clearly, we can put all of this technology, all of the insulate. If you don't teach someone how to use these products, they're not going to actually have the benefit of the investment. And that's a crazy point. And just in terms of sort of the pandemic, and I know we touched on this before, has that slowed anything down or has that accelerated it at all?
It's useful for us because it's enabled us to quietly sit in the background and get all of our data right.
Okay.
I would say the thing that's actually delayed more is fire safety, and rightly so.
Yeah, absolutely.
An awful lot of funding has gone towards that, and an awful lot of business resource has gone towards that. But again, we've used it as a time to get our data right, get the planning right, get everything in place so that when we're ready, we can go.
Yeah, fun.
And the other thing I would just like to say is that sustainability doesn't necessarily have to cost you money. So I know that's a bit of a weird thing to say, but a lot of the work that we've been doing at Peabody over the last year or so has just been tidying things up and shining a light on areas of the business where they wouldn't normally have shone a light on. Okay. So looking at energy procurement, making sure that is as efficient as possible. So we've managed to get zero carbon energy, because it's REGO backed at the moment, for our electricity at no cost.
Wow.
Talking to energy brokers, we were lucky enough to lock in before the energy spike. So that saved us money. So there are lots of bits and pieces we can do around that. Linking the social housing decarbonisation with our investment plan means that we can match fund with some of the work we're already doing. So we can be quite efficient about how we do it. So yes, it is going to cost. We're going to need help. We need funding for it, but there are things that you can do sustainably that actually do in the long term save you money. It's about making the right decision for the right property at the right time.
Well, yeah, I agree. And do you think we'll see more mergers? I know topic like Peabody and Catalyst, but clearly the government, and this isn't about politics, this podcast, it's about education, but we're being told to build more homes, be more sustainable, and make sure that building safety, rightfully so, is at the forefront of everything we're doing. Evidently, if you're Peabody, it's a little bit of an easier challenge in terms of the cost of that. But if you're a small housing association struggling to even deliver your basic services, how can you even take part in that? So are we going to see, I said it 10 years ago, are we going to see bigger housing associations created, bigger functions, so that we can get the economy of scale to deliver all of these things? Because we can't do all of them, can we? I mean, we can try, but it's expensive.
And with my old asset manager, I'd say let's calm down on development a little bit, but that's not what we're trying to do.
No.
the smaller housing associations, I'm a non-exec director of a small housing association in London, and it's a real challenge. And it's something that once the sort of building safety bit has calmed down a bit, will be the next thing that we really start focusing on.
Yeah.
I think that we need to work together. So I think the solution isn't necessarily, and there will always be mergers.
Of course,
People always like them.
Yeah.
But I think the solution actually is to work together and to be much more open, so that those who have the resource, to have the specializations, to have the architects and the retrofit coordinators, can actually develop a bit like we're doing with the advisory board. Is create the toolkit so other people can then just take them and not be so precious about our ideas, because we are genuinely all trying to get to the right place. And as I said, we said right at the start, if we don't get there, we failed. So so I think that it's incumbent on people like us to share more and to work more and to talk more about what we're trying to do, and just work together. I think
people are open to that. It used to be us versus, like I said, and it was very much our policy to keep it under wraps, etc. I think people are sharing more than ever, and hopefully that continues into the future. And as we look into the sort of future, how, and a bit of a side note, but we've talked about it a little bit. How do we instill and inspire the next generation of talent into our great industry? Because it genuinely has multifacets now. But I still think the messaging's sometimes misconstrued out in universities about what our sector can offer.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very, very exciting next 20 years. There's an awful lot of change that's going to happen. My role at the moment, I was thinking my role is a bit like the water carrier. So I'm there to set the standard and set the foundations for the people who come after me to really make the changes. But what we can do is we can communicate more effectively. And we can show what we are doing and where we are trying to go. And if you think of it in terms, I'm a big fan of triple bottom line reporting. If you've ever spoken to me, I won't talk about it all day. But we are financially viable. We are becoming more environmentally aware, and we're also socially responsible. And I think that one of the things that we see, I see it with my children, is that they want the social angle. They want to feel part of something. They want the cause. And it's a great cause. We're helping people to have homes, and then we're investing in them after that. And we've got other programs going on. It's a great cause. So we've got that. We've got the environmental, and it's a going business. I can't see actually. There's many better places to be.
Oh, no. I agree. It just wasn't. I go to loads of unis and I speak to loads and loads and loads of students, and I love that part of my job. It's my favourite part. However, I would say that it's very few people that go, do you know what? A career in housing is where I'm destined, because it's not seen as the career of choice. Once you're in it, I think you do see that, and you never really leave it once you get into it because of the social purpose. But it's how we just inspire that next generation to want to do it as part of their university and want to go into it.
Well, we will be, obviously with all of the innovation, we will really be quite innovative over the next 10, 15 years. Because we have to be, for then everyone else is going to learn from what we're doing. So if you want to be in that and you want to be delivering, then I would say that it's here, and in new build is where you'll be.
Well, you also mentioned it at the beginning actually, and have talked about it throughout. Data. I mean, who would have thought we would have been on data-driven decisions at this point if you'd have gone back 10, 15 years ago? Asset management has evolved incredibly over that time, and there's a lot of data professionals out there, and there's a lot of data in all these different organizations, but it's going to be key, isn't it, to the future? It's how we're going to make all of our investments, decisions, etc. So
the other thing also, we've just got to be better at selling ourselves.
Yeah, of course, we do.
It's a great story, and I don't think that we sell it enough. In terms of what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it, and the social purpose that we have, especially now that we get, obviously there's quite a lot of media attention on us, but it's, the success stories I don't think are highlighted quite as well as they should be.
No. And final thing, and I always ask every guest that comes on, if you were to sort of change anything in UK government, if you were given the ability to change one thing, what would it be? What would you do? What would you change? Whether that to be accelerate the decarbonisation agenda or just to make housing in general a better place?
I would ask for joined up decision making that went from central government through to local government and then down, so that actually if we were lined up for something, we delivered it rather on a long-term scale. So I'm talking 10 years, a 10-year scale with funding, with policies that all went to a central place, would make things so much easier for us.
Amazing. Love that. Well, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for coming on the podcast. And I feel like I've learned more and could probably talk to you for hours and hours about all of this, but I really appreciate it, and I look forward to tracking your journey at Peabody and the rest of your career.
Great, thank you very much. It's been really fun.
Thank you. Cheers.